The capital of Somalia is becoming a ghost city as residents flee fighting between government forces backed by Ethiopian troops and fighters still loyal to the Islamic Courts Union. The United Nations says more than 320,000 people have fled Mogadishu in recent weeks. Many have no shelter and little or no access to water, food and medical care. Human rights workers say nearly 300 people have been killed in a week of fighting in the capital. As Mohammed Ado reports, it's all contributing to a humanitarian crisis.
The suffering of the displaced is beyond description. With no proper shelter, women and children, some just days old, live under trees. The same missiles that sent them fleeing from the city are following them to their makeshift camps.
They shelled us last night. The missile fell down there. We had to run away and seek cover elsewhere. We only came back much later.
With no medical facility nearby, the sick have to live with the pain and pregnant women have to deliver in the open. This woman is in labor. The only assistance she has is these women who have no medical experience.
We are helpless. This woman is in labor. 5 babies have now been born and we can't get them to hospital. We just want the fighting to stop.
This mentally ill man has been chained to a tree. His relatives fear he will wander away and get lost. A sharp rise in incidents of rape have also been reported as marauding militiamen take advantage of the helpless women who have no protection. Helpless as they are, they still have to part with the little money they have or the food rations given to them by agencies to get protection from local militiamen. The UN says that more than 320,000 of Mogadishu's 2 million residents have fled since February, sending streams of people into the squalid camps. They have little to eat, no shelter, and disease is spreading. The war-ravaged country is suffering its worst humanitarian crisis in its recent history. UN officials now fear Somalia's government is holding up vital aid supplies to people fleeing the fighting. They say the government has been demanding to inspect all food and medical shipments, holding up potentially life-saving aid. And back in the city, Mogadishu continues to burn. Somali government forces and their Ethiopian backers use tanks and heavy artillery to pound parts of the war-torn capital. Hundreds have been killed in 8 straight days of fighting. The government and its Ethiopian allies are trying to quash a growing rebellion being mounted by clan militia and remnants of the Union of Islamic Courts. But it is the people of Mogadishu, whether still stuck in the city or sheltering outside, who suffer most. And with every day of fighting in Mogadishu, the hopes of Somalia's people keep dwindling. Mohammed Ado, Al-Jazeera, Nairobi.
Earlier today, I spoke to Jendayi Frazer, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. I began by asking her about a new report by a British think tank which lays some of the blame for the instability in Somalia on the U.S. and Ethiopia.
Well, I think that's unfortunate, given that we know that Somalia has been a failed state for the last 16 years, long before Ethiopia came into Somalia on the invitation of the transitional federal government. And certainly I think it would be far-fetched to claim that the United States is responsible for the state of affairs in Somalia. In fact, it's to the contrary. We have been trying to help the transitional federal government as well as trying to assist the Somali people. And so to try to lay blame on the affairs of Somalia on the doorsteps of Ethiopia and the United States, I think, is a bit of a stretch.
Well, there have been a number of unexplained assassinations in Somalia. There have also been rumors of covert U.S. actions in Somalia. Is the U.S. involved in there in a covert way?
No, the United States is not. The assassinations that have been taking place have actually been by the Al-Shabaab militia against Hawiya clan leaders who have tried to reach out to the transitional federal government. It's classic tactics of extremists who do not want more moderate elements to come together in dialogue.
Does the United States back Ethiopian intervention in Somalia?
I've said many times that we counseled Ethiopia not to go into Somalia, but Ethiopia went in for its own national security interests, which we understand. They also went in on the invitation of the transitional federal government And I think that more generally across the region, people recognize that as the Islamic courts and the extremists within the courts opened up Somalia to terrorists, that it was going to become inevitable that Ethiopia would, on invitation of the transitional federal government, act in Somalia to protect its national security interests.
Let me tell you what the report also says. It says that support for the Islamic Courts Union for the past decade has been fairly consistent and, to use the words of the report, is unlikely to melt away. Are you not concerned that U.S. policy in Somalia will lead to the further ascendancy of the Islamic Courts Union, and that could be in some way open up another front for what your administration calls the war on terror?
Well, I think it's interesting, again, the report, there was no such thing as an Islamic Courts Union. Prior to the beginning of last year, there were Islamic courts, which were based in local communities, based in the clans, particularly in the Ayr sub-clan of the Hawiye. And so the courts union as a union actually has been disrupted. And so no, I'm not too concerned that U.S. policy will contribute to the support for the Islamic Courts Union. Islamic courts, they're fine. They're organic courts coming out of communities. We have no problem with it.